Again, if you just raise your hand, we'll get a microphone to you real quick. If you have any questions for Steve? All right, we'll go down in front.
Jay Clemens, NBC Atlanta. Do you find yourself, when you talk to NFL officials that do the same thing, that they're more envious of the college system where you can essentially have replays whenever? Or do you think they feel more constraint, more pressure to get things right, where in college you know that if anything's questionable, 50-50, that you know it will be reviewed pretty much?
Yeah, it's a great question. And part of it is the kind of the starting point in the philosophy around replay. When it was introduced into college, every play was reviewed by a replay official. You know, the NFL is more in a challenge system up until they get to certain points in the game, and then it really reversed to be like ours. Our coaches would not want to go to the NFL version. They like I mean, they still have a challenge capability, but they know that the replay official is looking at every play. So I think that our coaches really like where we are and would not allow us to kind of back up to a challenge system. Now, with that said, there's a lot of discussion around that because we've got a lot of work around, you know, pace of the game, keep the game moving. And there's one thought to say that, you know, if it's a 5-yard pass in the middle of the first quarter, rather than replay coming in and stopping the game, let's let the coach decide, is that important or not? So, so I think that the differences are very, you know, from a coaching perspective, very different. And I'm not sure our coaches would want to go to the NFL system.
Yeah, if I could have a follow-up question. You mentioned pace of play. The first time I covered the media days here was 2013. There was like kind of a haves and have-nots of teams that ran spread offense, fast-paced, and guys that ran traditional. What's your opinion of how things have evolved in terms of how you guys handle pace of play over the last 5 years?
Yeah, great question. And we've seen, you know, certain teams, even though they may be more traditional, they'll have packages where they'll go up tempo. I think what's happened, what has transitioned in this is that the officials have gotten to be really good at managing pace of play. You know, when we changed from the old 25-second play clock to the new, you know, 40-second clock, really the offense controls the pace of the game. That said, when we have substitutions, the officials have to manage the substitution process very well, and I think that's what we've gotten good at. We now, if there is substitution, we give the defense the opportunity to match up. It's always a cat and mouse game between the offensive and defensive coordinator. But now, if you want to go fast and you don't substitute, then you can go really fast. If you do sub, then you know you give the defense an opportunity to match up. But I can tell from my perspective, because in the early days we had a lot of coaches, especially the offensive-oriented coaches, complaining about how we manage pace of play. Now we don't get those complaints, and we work hard to manage it, and I think we manage it in a way that allows the offense to go very fast, but if they substitute, then the defense gets a chance to match up. And so I think we settled into a good spot there, and as you've noticed, it's not really been a rule debate over the last couple of years around pace of play.
We'll go back left over here.
Steve, do you see us with the replay process looking at more judgment calls? Obviously, targeting is kind of a judgment call, but with some of the new, more safety rules, the low block rules, I don't know, pass interference might be a stretch, but getting to the point where we're looking more at judgment calls on replay.
Yeah, it's a great question, and so what we're trying to do, you know, replay was not initiated to make everything perfect. You know, the idea and the thought is, you know, you want to correct obvious errors with indisputable video evidence. It's clear that over time we've expanded and expanded and expanded what's reviewable. We've had a lot of debate, you know, you talk about judgment calls on the ineligible receiver downfield. Very difficult call to make. We've changed our mechanics, we've gotten much better at that. But now the question is, well, should we make that reviewable? So we're at a balanced window right now. Every year we add a little bit more to replay, excuse me, but we know it's at the cost of time in the game. And so we're trying to look for that balance of, you know, when do we want the game stopped? When do we want to shut it down versus keeping the game moving? And so we're in a pretty good window right now. We talk about different things. I personally hope it's a long time before we get to judgment calls, because that could really bog our game down unless we went to a challenge type system. But right now actually we list out the judgment calls that are reviewable, and probably the one is most important is targeting, and I am glad that's reviewable, because by rule we tell our officials, the rule book says, when in question, get your marker down for targeting, and then let replay come in on it. So that is such an important call in our game that it's worthy of review. But we really are going to press back as much as we can on adding more judgment into the replay system just to keep the game moving.
Go to the camera position, back left.
Yesterday, Commissioner Sankey discussed the idea of sports gambling and emphasized state legislatures in the Southeastern Conference not to legalize it for the safety of the players. That's also something I imagine maybe you guys have discussed. And what is your take on the sports gambling, how you guys would handle it if it became legal in one of the SEC states?
Well, it's a great question, and first of all, let me say our commissioner is our spokesperson around gambling and issues around that. Here's what I would say from an officiating standpoint. This is no change for us. This is no different. Whether it was legal or illegal, things were out there. And really, from our standpoint, it's the integrity, it's the character, but then it's the evaluation and background checks. And so, we're very diligent. We have every year, not just when you first come in, every year, our officials go through a very robust background check. But the integrity issues there, we're evaluating every call. So if there's any issue there, we'll deal with it. But in reality for us, this is no change. This was as important an issue to me last year as it will be in 2 years. Our guys, just have to stay away from that completely.
We'll go over here on the third row, right in the middle.
To kind of continue the conversation on replays, a lot of times if the call is overturned and there's a lot of time spent reviewing that replay, the momentum of the game kind of shifts. Do you ever see in the future a time limit on the amount of time officials can spend reviewing replays?
So it's a great question, and by rule, there is no time limit. But we have a kind of a working time limit. If you're a replay official and you get to 2 minutes, you need to get out of it. Because if in 2 minutes there's nothing indisputable, then we're probably going to go down a bad path or try to piece some things together. Now, there's some plays that you can naturally get, and our TV producers are very good at, side-by-side screens and that sort of thing. But Commissioner, when we went to collaborative replay, and that is a much better system. We've been much more consistent. We've avoided the dreaded incorrect outcome. But the concern was time. And last year, we decreased our time. We were a minute 26 the year before on average to a minute 16. Commissioner wanted us to get to a minute 15. We got really close. We want to get it right, but we want to keep the game moving. And so really, the next step, how do we get it even quicker? And that's to get rid of these 2 minute plus replays. That's where fans, on average, a minute 16 is not bad, but it's that one that drags beyond 2 minutes that we need to eliminate. So we don't have a hard, fast rule, but our replay officials know if you get to 2 minutes, and they have a counter right there, it's right there in front of their face. If you get to 2 minutes and you don't know, you know, and let it stand and let's move on. So it's a good question. And again, it goes back to that issue that people want replay to make everything perfect, and that's not what replay was initiated for.
Down here on the front row.
This may be an odd question, but following up on what you just said, do you guys ever work with the TV crews in terms of what kind of angles you'd like to see on a broadcast that would actually help you do your job, and I guess vice versa, where you could help them out as well?
Yes, and in fact, that's one of the innovations. A couple of years ago when we put in new replay gear, when we started Collaborative, we also put in new replay equipment in the stadiums. And what it actually gives now, so in the initial onset of replay, a replay official had to wait for TV to actually show them replays. And now we actually have where a replay official can go to 4 cameras, so it's preset and they select at each game, but usually, you know, it's the high sideline, they have a handheld, and then there's usually a low and a high end zone. And we also now have available to us as replay officials the coaches high 50 and the coaches end zone. So we can go to those immediately without waiting on a replay review. But then beyond that, it is up to that TV producer to really understand, hey, what we're looking at. And we have a ring down phone. Occasionally we'll pick up the phone and let the producer know, hey, you know, a lot of times this happens. So you have a fumble and the producer's saying, we're looking at, was it a fumble or was his knee down? But many times, we know it's a fumble, but you have to have a clear recovery. So we'll pick up the ring down phone and say, hey, we're looking for the recovery. Give me a shot of the recovery, and that'll help them work with us. And so most of our TV producers are now really good, and they're tuned in on when we have a replay stop, that they need to feed any shot that they have that's outside those cameras that we have access to immediately into the replay booth. And, that's my biggest concern, is that we don't get one of those, and then, we make a ruling, and then, 3 plays later, they say, oh, let's go back to that fumble and show another view that we never got, which we would have overturned it if we'd have had that. So believe it or not, we talk to our TV producers, our replay official early in the week, just kind of exchange contact information and kind of go through the basics. And then at our 110-minute meeting before the game, we talk to the TV producer about what we're looking for, and they talk to us about, hey, we've added a new camera, we've got Pylon Cam today, or whatever it is. So there's a lot of interaction with our replay official and that TV producer.
Any other questions for Steve? All right, thanks, Steve.
Thank you.